Dear listener, welcome back. Let the world outside your window fall away, and let us journey together to a time before time, to the very dawn of creation as it was imagined by the ancient Greeks. Tonight, our story will take us to the deepest and most mysterious of all realms, the kingdom of the Underworld. But to understand that shadowed land, we must first understand how it came to be. Our story, therefore, does not begin with the whispers of departed souls, but with the first, great, silent breath of the cosmos itself. In the beginning, before there was a beginning, when existence itself was merely a whisper of possibility, there stretched the infinite, formless void of chaos. It was not merely emptiness, but a writhing, boundless, and untamed potential, a darkness so complete that even the concept of darkness had yet to be born. Here, in this primordial chasm, a great, slow, cosmic dance began, and the first stirrings of creation took shape. From the heart of this endless chaos, the first of the great primordial deities emerged. First came Gaia, the Earth Mother. Imagine her form coalescing from the void, like a beautiful, slow-motion dream taking shape in the mind of a sleeping god. She was the foundation, the great, broad-breasted earth, the giver of all life. And as she drew her first breath, the very act of her existence pushed back the boundaries of nothingness, creating space itself. Next, from the same chaotic source, arose Tartarus, the deepest pit, a great, yawning gulf so profound that even Gaia's endless, rocky depths could not contain it. Unlike Gaia's warm and fertile embrace, Tartarus was the cold, the dark, the place where light itself went to die. This was the proto-underworld, a domain of such terrible, unimaginable depth that it was said a bronze anvil, dropped from the heavens, would fall for 9 days and 9 nights before reaching the earth, and another 9 days and nights to fall from the earth to the bottom of Tartarus. It was the great, dark counterpoint to the growing light of the world, waiting patiently in its eternal darkness for the denizens that would one day populate its depths. And between them, bridging the great gulf between foundation and void, came the third of the primordial powers, Eros. Not love as mortals would come to know it, but the fundamental, cosmic force of attraction, the divine power that compels the scattered dust of creation to coalesce into form, the desire that drives like to like. With these first great powers established, the cosmic dance continued. The beautiful Mother Earth, Gaia, in her infinite creativity, gave birth to Uranus, the star-studded sky, who stretched himself above her like a vast, protective, and loving blanket. And from the union of earth and sky, the first divine children were born, the mighty Titans, 12 great and powerful beings who would rule the cosmos before the age of Olympus. Yet, even as creation flourished above, the great void of Tartarus below deepened further. Unlike the evolving, sunlit dominions of his siblings, the realm of Tartarus remained changeless, eternal, a dark mirror to the growing brightness of the world. Here, in this lightless prison, the very seeds of future punishment were sown. For what else was needed for cosmic justice but a place where the guilty could be held forever? Time, in these early ages, flowed differently, measured not in the rising and setting of the sun, but in the rise and fall of entire divine ages. The Titans ruled under their king, Cronus, who had overthrown his own father, Uranus, in an act of terrible, cosmic violence. But fate, that silent spinner of inevitable stories, had already woven the thread that would unspool the reign of Cronus. His youngest son, Zeus, who had been saved from his father's devouring hunger, grew to mighty godhood in secret on the island of Crete. And when his time came, he gathered his own allies and waged a great and terrible war against his father and the other Titans, a war that shook the very foundations of reality itself. For 10 long years, the cosmos trembled as the old guard of the Titans clashed with the new generation of the Olympians, thunder against earthquake, tradition against a new and unwritten destiny. The Great War, the Titanomachy, came to its conclusion not through mere strength, but through a brilliant and daring strategy. The young Zeus descended into the ancient, dark prison of Tartarus, and there he freed the Cyclopes and the Hundred-Handers, monstrous and powerful beings whom Cronus had long ago imprisoned in its depths. These grateful creatures, in their gratitude, forged for their liberator the weapons of ultimate victory, the thunderbolt, the trident, and the helm of darkness, weapons that would become the eternal symbols of power for the three great brothers who would soon rule the cosmos. When the Titans finally fell, defeated by the combined might of the Olympians and their new, monstrous allies, it was Tartarus itself that claimed them. The primordial deep, which had waited so patiently through all the ages of creation, finally received its first great purpose. The defeated Titans were cast down into its hollows, where they would remain imprisoned for all of eternity, their ancient, titanic rage becoming the very foundation of all future suffering and punishment. The first great war was over. The first great justice had been done. And now, the victorious new gods would divide the spoils of their cosmic victory. In the quiet aftermath of the great and terrible Titanomachy, a new kind of silence settled over the cosmos. The thunder of Zeus's lightning bolts had faded, the earth-shaking rage of the Titans was now imprisoned deep within the unbreakable walls of Tartarus, and a new, untested order awaited its birth. The three great brother kings, the sons of Cronus who had led the rebellion against their father, Zeus, the lord of the sky, Poseidon, the master of the sea's deep power, and Hades, the eldest, the quietest, the most thoughtful of the three, met to divide creation among themselves. Legend speaks of a simple, almost humble, ceremony. They would not decide their dominions through argument or through a contest of strength. The war was over, and the time for conflict had passed. Instead, they would leave the decision to fate. They took a simple bronze helm, a warrior's helmet, and into it, they placed 3 lots, 3 marked stones, each one representing a different third of the great, newly ordered world. It was a moment of profound trust, an acceptance that their destinies were now bound to a power even greater than their own. Yet, one cannot help but feel that destiny has a way of making what is necessary appear to be accidental. As the eldest, Hades could have claimed the first choice by right of birth. But he did not. He allowed the lots to be drawn. And so, the division was made. To the youngest brother, Zeus, the one who had led the great rebellion, went the vast, open expanse of the sky and the bright air. He would take his throne on the high, cloud-veiled peak of Mount Olympus, from where he could survey all of creation, his thunderbolt a symbol of his new and absolute authority. To the second brother, the tempestuous and powerful Poseidon, went the great, wine-dark, and mysterious seas, the trackless waters where monsters still lurked and where the power of the earth-shaker would be felt in every crashing wave. And to the eldest brother, Hades, fell the final lot. His was the third portion of creation, the vast, silent, and mysterious dominion of the underworld, the kingdom of the dead. Some whisper that he drew the short lot, that he received the least desirable inheritance, a kingdom of shadows and silence while his brothers ruled over realms of light and life. But others say that the sovereignty over death, the great and final destination of all things, always belonged to the eldest, the most somber, and that the drawing of the lots was merely a formality, a ritual to affirm a fate that was already written in the stars. Whatever the truth, the new sovereign accepted his portion with a quiet and solemn dignity, a gravitas befitting one who would rule over all mortal endings. There was no complaint, no hint of resentment. he understood his role completely. While his brothers would rule over the ever-changing, chaotic realms of life and motion, his would be the land of silence, of memory, and of permanence. In his own quiet way, he knew that he was the most powerful of all. For no matter how brightly a hero's glory might shine, no matter how great a king's empire, all things, even the gods themselves, in their own time, would eventually find their way to his dominion. None could ultimately escape his gentle, inexorable, and final sovereignty. And so began his great journey downward. It was both a physical and a metaphysical descent. As the new king of the underworld left the bright, sunlit halls of Olympus, he was transforming. The god who had known the warmth of the sun and the sound of divine laughter was becoming something else. Not darker, but deeper. Not colder, but more attuned to the immense, solemn weight of finality that would now characterize his entire existence. Imagine him now, on that long, lonely journey. He passed through the layers of the earth, through great, silent caverns that seemed to swallow the light itself, through winding passages where the air grew still and heavy. The familiar sounds of the upper world faded behind him, replaced by a silence so profound it was almost a sound in itself. At last, he reached the very heart of his new kingdom. Here, where the immense pressure of the earth and the absolute darkness of the void met in a perfect, eternal marriage, the Lord of the Dead established his throne. It was not a throne of gold, like those on Olympus, but one of black obsidian and unyielding adamantine, materials that had never known the touch of light. Its form was simple, majestic, and severe, a seat of power that spoke not of glory, but of absolute and final authority. And from this throne, he began to shape his dominion. The raw, chaotic space of the underworld began to respond to his silent, unspoken will. Great caverns expanded to accommodate the need for vast courts of judgment where the deeds of mortals would one day be weighed. Long, winding tunnels branched out like the arteries of a great, sleeping heart, creating the pathways for the great, mythological rivers that would soon flow through his realm. The very architecture of death was taking shape, each new hall, each new chamber, each new passage forming with an inevitable and solemn purpose. Thus was the eternal order of the cosmos established. The sky, the sea, and the underworld, each ruled by its appointed lord. And thus began the long and profound story of the depths below, the shadowed kingdom where all mortal tales ultimately find their end, and where new, unseen stories are forever beginning their long and quiet gestation. The Lord of the Dead sat upon his new throne, in his new kingdom, and in the profound and patient silence, he waited. The new king of the dead did not inherit a fully formed kingdom. His dominion, in the beginning, was a vast, formless, and silent potential, a great, dark cavern at the base of creation. And so, with the same deliberate, solemn purpose with which he had accepted his fate, he began to shape it. From the deep, ancient rock of his realm, the great rivers of the underworld began to emerge, their waters flowing not with the life-giving essence of the world above, but with the fundamental principles of death itself. These were not mere geographical boundaries, they were the very arteries of the afterlife, each with its own character, its own purpose, and its own profound, symbolic meaning. First to materialize was the river Styx, the most sacred and most terrible of all the underworld rivers. Imagine its waters, not clear, but a deep, inky black, flowing silently and slowly through the darkest caverns. The Styx was born from hatred and from the immutable power of divine necessity, and its waters held a power so absolute that even the great gods of Olympus could not ignore it. When the gods sought to bind themselves with an unbreakable oath, they would not swear by their own names or by the heavens. They would call upon the Styx, whose black, sluggish current held the very weight of permanence itself. To break such an oath was to invite a punishment so severe that it could strip a god of their divine power for 9 long cycles of the sun, a fate so terrible that even the mighty Zeus honored the river's authority. Next flowed the gentle, whispering waters of the river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. Its pale, milky currents moved without a sound, and a thick, white mist always hung above its surface, a mist that seemed to soften the hard edges of memory. The souls who would one day drink from the Lethe would find their earthly concerns, their passions, their sorrows, and their joys dissolving like mist in the morning sun. It offered a kind of peace, the quiet oblivion of a past released, a necessary cleansing for those who might one day be reborn into the world above, unburdened by the weight of a life already lived. Then came the dark, heavy waters of the Acheron, the river of pain and woe. Its currents did not flow, but seemed to seethe, thick with the echoes of all the mortal suffering, all the grief, and all the sorrow of the world. It formed a great, sorrowful barrier between the lands of the living and the final resting places of the dead. Unlike the Lethe's gentle erasure, the passage across the Acheron was one of acknowledgement. To cross its dark waters was to confront the reality of one's own mortality, to feel the full weight of one's ending before the journey could continue. Forth emerged the Phlegethon, the river of fire. But this was a fire unlike any known in the mortal world. It was a river of liquid flame that blazed without consuming, that gave off an intense, searing heat but produced no smoke. Its eternal flames danced across its surface, defying all natural law, creating a torrent of light and heat that seemed to purify rather than destroy. Those souls who were destined for the deepest punishments would one day know its burning touch, but all who entered the underworld would glimpse its fiery light from a safe distance, a constant, awesome reminder that some aspects of the divine remained forever beyond mortal comprehension. And last to form was the Cocytus, the river of lamentation. Here, the very essence of grief itself flowed as water. Its icy, slow-moving current preserved the tears of all who had ever mourned, creating a permanent, echoing record of sorrow that would forever whisper through the silent halls of death. It marked the final boundary of the great pit of Tartarus, where the most terrible punishments awaited those who had committed the greatest crimes against the gods and the cosmic order. With the 5 great rivers established, the sovereign of the dead began to populate his dominion with its necessary guardians and attendants, each chosen for their unique and eternal ability to maintain order in this world of final transition. First to answer the call was Charon, the ancient and grim ferryman. Imagine him, a figure as old as the rivers themselves, his form decrepit, his robes tattered, yet his purpose eternal. He took up his station at the shores of the river Acheron, his weathered, gnarled hands learning to guide his simple, unadorned skiff across the treacherous, sorrowful waters. His eyes, deep-set and hollow, developed the ability to see not the status a soul had held in life, but the truth of its readiness for the journey ahead. The living feared his grim, silent visage, but the dead would come to see him as their first, necessary guide into their new existence. At the very gates of the kingdom, a great and terrible guardian materialized, Cerberus, the 3-headed hound of Hades, his very existence a challenge to the laws of nature. Each of his great heads served a different purpose. One, with its keen sense of smell, was eternally vigilant against the living who might seek to enter the underworld without permission. Another, with its sharp and terrible hearing, was ever alert for any of the dead who might attempt to escape their assigned fate. And the third, with its deep, knowing eyes, seemed to welcome those souls whose time had truly and properly come. His terrible, echoing bark was the sound of finality itself, and even the greatest of heroes would learn to respect the sacred barrier that he upheld. And to preside over the great and final judgment of souls, three figures of immense wisdom and integrity emerged to serve as the judges of the dead. They were Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus. Each had been a great and just king in the world above, and their earthly experience, their renowned wisdom and their unwavering commitment to justice, now qualified them to evaluate the lives of all who would stand before them in the great hall. Minos, with his lawgiver's mind, could untangle the most complex moral situations. Rhadamanthus brought a strict adherence to principle, separating right from wrong with an unyielding clarity. And Aeacus, compassionate yet firm, understood the heavy weight of circumstance while still upholding the absolute standards of divine law. And so, piece by piece, the underworld transformed from an empty, formless void into a fully realized kingdom. The rivers had carved their paths. The guardians had taken their posts. The courts of judgment had been established. The territory of death had become a dark, solemn, and perfect mirror of the ordered world above, uniquely adapted to its eternal and unchanging function. The structure was now complete. It awaited only the arrival of its first true inhabitants, the first mortal souls who would make the long journey downward, following these newly established pathways to whatever afterlife their deeds had earned them. In the sunlit world above, the age of the gods had settled into a golden rhythm. Upon the earth, a new creation had appeared, a fragile and beautiful race known as mortals. They were not powerful like the gods, nor were they eternal. Their lives were brief, beautiful, and fleeting, like the wildflowers that bloomed for a single, glorious season before withering back into the soil. In these early days, the concept of death was a distant, abstract thing, a story told by the gods, but not yet a reality felt in the hearts of men. But the great loom of fate, which spares no one, had already woven the first threads of mortality into the grand tapestry of existence. Imagine a simple shepherd, his name long lost to the whispers of time, living a quiet life in the green, rolling hills of Arcadia. His days were measured by the slow passage of the sun across the sky, his companions the quiet, grazing sheep, his music the gentle sighing of the wind through the ancient olive trees. He lived, he loved, he grew old. And one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of crimson and gold, he lay down to rest beneath his favorite olive tree and, with a final, gentle sigh, his breath left his body. In that moment, a profound and bewildering separation occurred. The shepherd's soul, a faint, shimmering, and ethereal echo of the man he had been, rose from his still form. He looked down upon the body that had been his home for so long, and he felt a strange sense of detachment, a quiet confusion. The world he had known, the familiar sights and sounds of his life, began to seem distant, muted, as if he were viewing them through a thick, gray veil. The bleating of his sheep was a faint, far-off sound. The vibrant colors of the sunset had faded to a uniform, pearlescent gray. He was no longer a part of the world of the living. He was a shade, a ghost, a traveler who had lost his way between two worlds. It was then, in this moment of quiet, lonely confusion, that a new figure appeared at his side. This was Hermes, the messenger of the gods, his feet adorned with winged sandals that allowed him to travel between the realms with the speed of thought. But today, he was not a messenger. He was a guide, a psychopomp, a gentle and solemn conductor of souls. He appeared not with a flash of divine light, but with a quiet, reassuring presence. In his hand, he carried his famous staff, the caduceus, its two entwined serpents representing the delicate balance between life and death. He looked at the lost and bewildered soul of the shepherd, and his eyes, which had seen all the wonders of Olympus, were filled not with judgment, but with a quiet, compassionate understanding. "It is time," Hermes whispered, his voice not a command, but a gentle invitation. Your journey is over. And a new one must now begin. And so, the first journey to the underworld began. Hermes led the shepherd's soul away from the familiar hills of Arcadia, and as they walked, the landscape of the living world began to transform around them. The path led them downward, always downward, into the deep, shadowy places of the earth. They passed through dark, silent forests where the trees had no leaves, and through winding caverns where the only sound was the slow, rhythmic dripping of water, like a great, subterranean clock counting the seconds of eternity. The warm, sunlit air of the world above was replaced by a cool, still atmosphere that tasted of damp earth and old stone. Finally, after a long and silent journey, they arrived at the banks of a great, dark river. Its waters were a deep, inky black, and they flowed without a sound, their surface as smooth and as reflective as polished obsidian. This was the river Acheron, the river of woe, the great and final barrier between the world of the living and the kingdom of the dead. And there, moored to the shore, was a simple, weathered skiff. Standing in the skiff, his form silhouetted against the dim, gray light of the cavern, was the grim and ancient ferryman, Charon. He looked at the newly arrived soul, his ancient, hollow eyes seeming to pierce through the ethereal form of the shepherd, weighing his worthiness for the passage. The price, Charon croaked, his voice a dry, rasping sound, like the grinding of stones. Hermes explained to the shepherd's soul that passage across the river was not free. A toll was required, a single coin, an obolus, to be paid to the ferryman. But the shepherd, a simple man from a time before such customs had been established, had no coin. He had been buried by his family with love and with sorrow, but not with the price of his final passage. And so, a new and terrible reality of the underworld was established. Those souls who arrived at the river's edge without the proper fare were doomed to wander the banks of the Acheron for 100 long years, their ghostly forms pacing back and forth in a state of perpetual, sorrowful limbo, able to see the final resting place of their kin, but unable to reach it. But Hermes, in his compassion for this first, unprepared soul, reached into his own divine purse. He placed a single, golden drachma, a coin of the gods, into the ethereal hand of the shepherd's shade. The shepherd, in turn, offered it to the grim ferryman. Charon accepted the coin, his gnarled hand closing around it, and with a silent, solemn nod, he gestured for the soul to board his skiff. The journey across the Acheron was a silent and somber one. The only sound was the gentle, rhythmic dip of Charon's long pole into the black, still water. As they moved toward the far shore, the last, faint echoes of the world of the living faded completely, replaced by the profound, absolute silence of the underworld. When they reached the other side, the shepherd's soul stepped onto the shores of Hades. Before him stood the great, dark gates of the kingdom, and guarding those gates was the terrifying, three-headed hound, Cerberus. The great beast looked at the newly arrived soul, and one of its heads let out a low, welcoming growl, while another watched the path back to the river, its eyes burning with a fiery vigilance, ensuring that none who entered could ever leave. Hermes led the soul through the great gates and into a vast, cavernous hall, its ceiling lost in the darkness above. At the far end of the hall, upon three great, dark thrones, sat the judges of the dead, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus. They looked upon the shepherd's soul, their gazes penetrating, just, and absolute. The shepherd's life, a simple tapestry of quiet days and simple deeds, was laid bare before them. There were no great acts of heroism, but there were also no great crimes. It was the life of an ordinary, decent man. The judges conferred in quiet, somber tones, and then, Minos, the chief judge, delivered the verdict. The shepherd's soul was deemed worthy of a peaceful, if unremarkable, afterlife. Hermes then guided the soul out of the great hall of judgment and into a vast, gray, and misty landscape. This was the Asphodel Meadows, the final resting place for the vast majority of ordinary souls. The air here was cool and still, and the ground was covered in a great, endless field of pale, ghostly asphodel flowers. Here, the shepherd's soul joined the countless other shades who drifted aimlessly through the misty fields, their memories of their former lives now a faint, distant dream. There was no joy here, but there was also no pain. There was only a quiet, eternal, and profound peace. The first journey was complete. The path had been established. The rules of passage, of payment, of judgment, had been set. The great, silent machinery of the underworld was now fully operational, ready to receive the endless procession of mortal souls that would follow. The kingdom of the dead was no longer just a place, it was now a process, a destiny, a final, solemn, and perfectly ordered conclusion to every mortal story. With the great judgment established and the pathways of the afterlife now defined, the geography of the underworld itself began to respond to the divine will of its silent king. Like clay taking form beneath a master potter's hands, the vast, formless caverns of the deep earth shifted and evolved, creating distinct and separate environments where the different categories of souls would spend their eternity. Each of these three great realms emerged with its own character, its own quality of light, or its own profound absence thereof, a perfect and eternal mirror to the lives the souls had led in the sunlit world above. The vast majority of souls, the countless multitudes who had lived lives neither extraordinary in their virtue nor exceptional in their wickedness, were guided to the first and largest of these realms. This was the Asphodel Meadows. Imagine an endless, gray expanse stretching beyond mortal comprehension, a vast, silent plain where pale, colorless asphodel flowers bloomed without fragrance, their ghostly petals swaying gently in breezes that provided neither warmth nor chill. The sky above this land remained in a state of perpetual twilight, a soft, pearlescent gray, neither bright enough to inspire joy nor dark enough to oppress the soul with fear. This was a land of absolute neutrality, a kingdom of quiet, dreamlike limbo. Here, the souls of the dead, now mere shades, insubstantial echoes of their living selves, moved in a slow and gentle wandering. They drifted across the pale meadows like patches of morning mist, their forms translucent, their features softened and indistinct. They would occasionally recognize familiar faces from their earthly lives, a spouse, a child, a friend, but they found themselves unable to rekindle the passionate connections that had once defined their existence. A husband might drift past his wife, a faint flicker of recognition in his ethereal eyes, but the great, all-consuming love that had once filled his heart was now just a distant, faded memory. A mother might see the shade of her child, but the fierce, protective bond that had been the very center of her being was now a gentle, painless, and almost indifferent acknowledgement. In this realm, the sharp, vivid colors of mortal emotion had all faded to a uniform, gentle gray. Time itself held no meaning here, for nothing ever changed. There were no seasons to mark the passage of the years. No growth or decay punctuated the endless, unchanging existence. The landscape itself seemed to exist in a state of permanent neutrality. Streams of lukewarm, tasteless water wound their way through the fields of asphodel. Trees bore fruit that provided a kind of phantom sustenance, a memory of nourishment without the actual pleasure of taste or the satisfaction of a hungry belly. The very architecture of this domain ensured that the souls who dwelt here experienced neither want nor fulfillment, neither suffering nor bliss. It was a perfect, eternal balance, a quiet, dreamlike state that many in the vibrant, sunlit world above might have considered the ultimate punishment, though it brought no active suffering. It was simply an eternal, peaceful, and profound emptiness. In stark contrast to the gray, gentle monotony of the asphodel plains, a different territory, a land of golden, eternal light, began to coalesce at the furthest, most beautiful edge of the underworld kingdom. This was Elysium, the Elysian fields, the immortal reward for those souls whose lives had been judged as exceptional. These were the great heroes, the righteous kings, the gifted poets, and those few mortals who had earned the special favor of the gods. Here, an eternal spring held dominion over a gentle and beautiful landscape. The climate maintained a perfect warmth that neither oppressed nor chilled, while soft breezes carried the sweet, divine scent of ambrosia and of eternal, otherworldly flowers. Great, shady trees bore fruit that was perpetually ripe, yet never fell to decay, their branches always heavy with a bounty that never diminished. And streams of pure, sweet nectar, the very drink of the gods, wound their way through meadows where the grass was as soft as a lover's touch, yielding underfoot without ever being crushed. It was a province designed for perfect, eternal comfort, a paradise that was an idealized reflection of all that was most beautiful in the mortal world. The blessed inhabitants of Elysium did not wander aimlessly like the shades in the asphodel meadows. They found purpose and joy in the eternal pursuit of the very things that had brought them fulfillment in life. Great warriors who had died gloriously in battle engaged in mock, joyous combat, their skills forever sharp, their contests bringing the thrill of the fight with no actual pain or death. Poets and musicians composed verses and melodies of such divine beauty that they became a part of the very atmosphere of the blessed fields. Great athletes competed in games of strength and speed, their victories bringing honor without diminishing the grace of the defeated. Each soul was free to pursue whatever had brought them their greatest joy in life, now freed from the mortal limitations of age, of sickness, and of time. Unlike the other souls who drank from the waters of the river Lethe and forgot their mortal ties, the residents of Elysium often retained the memory of their lives, and could even, on rare occasions, whisper wisdom and guidance to their living descendants in the world above. And then there was the third great realm, the ancient pit that had existed since the dawn of creation, which now evolved from a simple prison for the defeated titans into the ultimate domain of divine punishment. This was Tartarus. It was not merely a place of suffering, it became a great and terrible workshop, a divine laboratory where the justice of the gods crafted punishments of perfect and eternal precision, each one tailored to reflect the exact nature of the crime that had been committed. Here, the landscape shifted and changed according to the needs of divine retribution. Great, sheer cliffs of black obsidian rose up to accommodate those who were condemned to push a boulder for all eternity. Vast lakes of fire formed to hold those who had betrayed the sacred laws of hospitality. And great, spinning wheels of burning bronze appeared for those mortals who had dared to challenge the authority of the gods themselves. It was here that the soul of Tantalus, a former king who had committed the terrible crime of serving his own son as a feast for the gods, found his eternal frustration. He stood for all time in a cool, clear pool of water, beneath the branches of a tree heavy with ripe, luscious fruit. But when his terrible thirst drove him to lower his head to drink, the waters would recede, leaving only dry, cracked earth. And when his gnawing hunger made him reach up for the sweet fruit, the branches would be lifted by a sudden wind, always just beyond his grasp. His punishment was to desire eternally what would remain perpetually, agonizingly, just out of reach. And here, too, was the soul of Sisyphus, a king who had been a master of cunning, a man who had twice escaped death through his cleverness. He learned now that even the sharpest mortal mind has its limits. He was condemned for all eternity to push a great, heavy boulder up a steep hill. With every ounce of his strength, with his muscles straining and the sweat pouring from his brow, he would push the great stone, inch by agonizing inch, toward the summit. And just as he was about to reach the very top, just as he thought his great labor might finally be at an end, the stone would slip from his grasp and roll all the way back down to the bottom, requiring him to begin his futile, pointless task all over again. His punishment was a perfect reflection of his crime, the eternal frustration of a clever man forever trying, and forever failing, to outsmart the cosmic order itself. These three great realms, the gray, silent peace of the asphodel meadows, the golden, joyful light of Elysium, and the dark, terrible, and just punishments of Tartarus, formed the final geography of the afterlife. The kingdom of the dead was now complete, its territories established, its laws absolute, ready to receive every mortal soul, and to render to each a perfect, unyielding, and eternal justice. The cosmic order had taken its definite shape. The three great brother kings now ruled their respective domains. Zeus, from his high and cloudy throne on Mount Olympus, governed the heavens and the affairs of gods and men. Poseidon, from his deep, coral palace, commanded the vast and restless seas, and Hades, the eldest brother, presided in grim, silent majesty over his ever-growing kingdom of the dead. Yet, while his brothers ruled with divine consorts by their sides, Zeus with the proud and regal Hera, Poseidon with the beautiful sea nymph Amphitrite, the master of the shadows reigned alone. Imagine his kingdom. A vast, silent, and magnificent domain of darkness and echo. A place of profound order, of absolute justice, of eternal peace. But it was a peace born of silence, a stillness unbroken by laughter or by song. His throne of black obsidian reflected no light, his great halls held no warmth, his subjects were but whispering, insubstantial shades. The weight of this profound and eternal solitude began to grow heavy upon the heart of its monarch. He was a king, perhaps the most powerful of all, for all things eventually came to him. But he was a king without a queen. And so, from the deep, cool darkness of his subterranean realm, he would sometimes gaze upward, his thoughts turning to the bright, sunlit world of the living, a world he had long ago forsaken. And it was during one of these quiet, lonely moments of contemplation that he saw her. In the world of light, in a field of eternal spring where the flowers never faded, wandered the beautiful daughter of the harvest goddess, Demeter. Her name was Persephone. And she was the very embodiment of life's promise, of youth, of innocence, and of the vibrant, joyful energy of the spring. Imagine her now, her laughter echoing across meadows that knew no winter, her feet light upon the soft, green grass as she picked flowers among the narcissus and the crocus. She moved through the living world not just as a maiden, but as possibility itself, as spring before the coming of autumn, as life before the first touch of sorrow. From the depths below, the dark king observed her dance through the sunlit fields. And in her graceful movements, in her radiant, joyful innocence, he saw not just a beautiful goddess, but a kindred spirit, a being who seemed to bridge the very worlds they inhabited. Her own name, in some ancient tellings, meant bringer of destruction, a strange and prophetic title for a maiden of the flowers, a name that seemed to speak of a hidden, deeper nature, of a destiny that connected her to the darkness as much as to the light. And in that moment, a great and terrible desire, a love born of an eternity of solitude, took root in the heart of the Lord of the dead. He knew that he must have her. He would make her his queen. With the silent, reluctant consent of his brother, Zeus, but without the knowledge of her loving mother, Demeter, the great plan was formed. One day, as Persephone wandered through a particularly beautiful meadow with her nymph companions, her eyes fell upon a single, strange, and impossibly beautiful flower. It was a narcissus, but one unlike any she had ever seen before. From a single root, 100 blossoms sprang forth, and the sweet, intoxicating fragrance it emitted seemed to fill the entire world. It was a flower planted there by Gaia, the Earth Mother herself, at the bidding of the gods, a beautiful, irresistible lure. As the young goddess reached down to pluck this wondrous bloom, the earth itself groaned. A great, dark chasm opened up in the green meadow, a hungry mouth yawning open from the depths below. Before her startled cry could fully form, a great, magnificent chariot of black obsidian and gold emerged from the chasm, drawn by 4 powerful, immortal steeds whose breath came as a cold mist, whose hooves struck sparks from the very air itself. And at the reins stood the driver, a majestic and terrible figure, his face grim with the knowledge of what this cosmic act would set in motion. It was the king of the underworld himself. Before Persephone could flee, before her companions could even understand what was happening, she was swept up into the chariot, her arms caught in a grip that radiated the chill of eternity. The journey downward occurred in a series of heartbeats, yet it seemed to stretch for an eternity. For Persephone, the world of light and color vanished, replaced by a terrifying, rushing darkness. She glimpsed vast, silent caverns that seemed to swallow the very light of the day she was leaving behind. She heard the faint, distant roar of the great underworld rivers, their sorrowful currents a chilling welcome to her new domain. And all the while, her abductor remained silent, his gaze fixed on the path ahead, his heart torn between the triumph of his desire and the grave knowledge of the cosmic imbalance he had just created. He was not just stealing a bride, he was stealing the spring itself from the world. Back in the sunlit meadow, a profound and terrible silence had fallen. The great chasm in the earth had closed as quickly as it had opened, leaving behind no trace, only the faint, sweet scent of the single, fatal flower. Persephone was gone. And in the great, golden fields of the world above, her mother, the harvest goddess Demeter, felt it instantly. It was not a sound she heard, but a sudden, chilling emptiness in her own divine soul, a wound torn in the sacred fabric that connected mother and child. And as the realization of her daughter's absence washed over her, a great and terrible cry of anguish broke from her lips, a cry that would wither the flowers in the fields and silence the birds in the sky. The search for her lost daughter, a search that would plunge the entire world into a long and barren winter, had just begun. In the sunlit meadow where Persephone had vanished, a profound and terrible silence had fallen. The great, dark chasm in the earth had closed as quickly and as silently as it had opened, leaving behind no trace, only the faint, sweet, and now deeply malevolent scent of the single, fatal narcissus flower. For a time, the world continued in its perfect, golden rhythm, unaware of the cosmic theft that had just occurred. But in her distant temples, and in the great, golden fields that were her dominion, the harvest goddess Demeter felt it instantly. It was not a sound she heard, nor a sight she saw. It was a sudden, chilling emptiness in her own divine soul, a wound torn in the sacred, invisible fabric that connects a mother to her child. A part of her own being had been ripped away, and a cold, dark void was left in its place. Her search began immediately. She first called her daughter's name, her voice, which usually held the warmth of the summer sun, now sharp with a rising panic. Persephone! Persephone! Her call echoed across the silent meadows, but the only answer was the gentle sighing of the wind. She journeyed to the place where her daughter had last been seen playing with the ocean nymphs, but they too were gone, having fled in terror at the sight of the dark king's chariot. Demeter found only the scattered flowers that Persephone had been gathering, their bright petals now beginning to wilt and fade, as if in sympathy with the goddess's growing dread. For 9 long days and 9 long nights, the great goddess wandered the earth, her frantic search growing more desperate with each passing hour. She took no rest. She tasted neither the sweet nectar nor the divine ambrosia of the gods. In her grief, she had cast off her radiant, divine form, and now appeared as an old, mortal woman, her beautiful hair unbound and dusty, her face a mask of sorrow, her robes dark and tattered. She carried 2 great torches, their flames burning day and night, a testament to her relentless, sleepless search. She questioned every creature she met, from the smallest field mouse to the greatest river god, but none had seen what had become of her lost daughter. The world itself began to feel the effects of her profound and all-consuming grief. Demeter was the goddess of the harvest, of all growing things, of the earth's fertility. And as her heart grew colder with sorrow, so too did the earth. A great and terrible change began to sweep across the land. The fields of golden wheat, which had stood so tall and proud, now began to wither and turn brown. The heavy, purple clusters of grapes shriveled on the vine. The great, ancient olive trees dropped their silver-green leaves, their branches becoming bare and skeletal. The very soil seemed to harden, refusing to accept the plow, refusing to yield its bounty. The life-giving power of the goddess was being withdrawn from the world, and a great, barren winter, a winter born not of the seasons, but of a mother's grief, began to descend upon the land of mortals. On the 10th day of her search, she encountered Hecate, the ancient and mysterious goddess of the crossroads and of magic, the one who sees the things that happen in the shadows. Hecate, her own torches casting a pale, ethereal light, had heard Persephone's cry, but she had not seen who had taken her. She advised Demeter to seek the counsel of the one being who sees all that happens beneath the sun, the great sun god, Helios. Together, the 2 goddesses journeyed to the palace of the sun in the far east. And there, the great, all-seeing god confirmed their worst fears. He told Demeter the entire story. He told her of the dark king of the underworld, of his lonely desire, of the silent consent of her own brother, Zeus, and of how her daughter had been stolen away to become the unwilling queen of the dead. Upon hearing this truth, Demeter's grief transformed into a cold and terrible rage. She was enraged not just at Hades for his theft, but at Zeus, the king of the gods, for his betrayal. In her fury, she made a solemn vow. She would not return to the halls of Mount Olympus. She would not allow a single seed to sprout, a single blade of grass to grow upon the earth, until her daughter was returned to her. And so, she continued her wandering, no longer as a seeker, but as an exile, her divine sorrow now a terrible, world-altering weapon. The great famine spread like a disease across the living world. The cities that had once flourished began to starve. The altars of the gods, which had once been heavy with the offerings of a grateful humanity, now stood empty and cold, for the farmers had nothing to offer. The very balance of the cosmos, the sacred relationship between gods and mortals, now teetered on the edge of catastrophe. For without mortal worship and sacrifice, even the great Olympians would begin to feel the slow, creeping pinch of their own diminished power. Finally, Zeus, from his high throne on Olympus, looked down upon the dying, barren earth, and he knew that he must act. The order of the world could not be allowed to collapse entirely. He sent his messengers, one by one, to plead with the grieving goddess. But she would not be moved. She sat in the temple she had built for herself at Eleusis, a dark and silent figure, her face a mask of unyielding sorrow, her will as hard and as barren as the frozen earth outside. The king of the gods realized that there was only one solution. He could not break a mother's grief. He would have to bend the ancient, unbreakable laws of the underworld. He summoned his swiftest messenger, the fleet-footed Hermes, and gave him a new and unprecedented commission. He was to descend into the kingdom of the dead, to stand before the Dark King himself, and to demand the return of the spring. Down from the sunlit peaks of Mount Olympus, the messenger god, Hermes, began his swift descent. His winged sandals carried him with the speed of thought, through the layers of the world, past the familiar landscapes of the living, and into the deep, silent, and shadowy realms of the underworld. He journeyed with a heavy and unprecedented commission from Zeus himself, to stand before the Dark King, Hades, and to persuade him to release his stolen bride. It was a task fraught with peril, for no god, not even the great king of Olympus, could command the Lord of the Dead within his own dominion. This would have to be a mission of diplomacy, of persuasion, of a delicate negotiation between two powerful and unyielding forces. As Hermes entered the great, echoing halls of Hades, he found the kingdom in a state of quiet, somber order. The shades of the dead drifted through the asphodel meadows, the great rivers flowed on their eternal, silent courses, and the grim ferryman, Charon, continued his ceaseless work. But at the heart of the kingdom, a new and profound tension had taken root. Upon her great, dark throne, next to her silent, brooding husband, sat the new queen of the underworld, Persephone. But she was not a happy bride. Her heart, which had been born of the sun and the spring, now ached with a deep and profound sorrow. She sat in silence, refusing all food and drink, her face a pale and beautiful mask of grief, her thoughts constantly turning to the sunlit world she had lost, and to the mother she so desperately missed. Hades, the Dark King, sat beside her, his own heart a complex tapestry of conflicting emotions. He had achieved his great desire. He had a queen to share his silent, eternal reign. But her sorrow was a constant, quiet reproach. He had stolen the spring, but he could not command its joy. He had captured the body of a goddess, but her spirit remained free, a prisoner of her own grief, her heart still bound to the world of light. He ruled over a kingdom of shadows, and now, a shadow had fallen over his own heart as well. It was into this tense and silent throne room that the messenger god, Hermes, arrived. He stood before the Dark King and Queen, his bright, living presence a stark contrast to the dim, gray light of the underworld. He delivered the message from Zeus. He spoke of the dying earth, of the great famine that was consuming the world of mortals, of the empty altars of the gods, and of the unyielding, world-altering grief of the goddess Demeter. He spoke of the cosmic imbalance that had been created, and of the necessity of restoring the natural order. And then, he made the king of the gods formal request, that Persephone be allowed to return to her mother, to bring the spring back to the dying world. Hades listened to the messenger's words in a profound and heavy silence. He knew that Zeus's request was, in reality, a command. He knew that he could not defy the will of the king of the gods, not when the very balance of the cosmos hung in the balance. A great and terrible sorrow washed over him. He would have to release his queen. He would have to return to his eternal, solitary reign. But as he looked at his beautiful, grieving bride, a new and cunning idea, a final, desperate gambit, took root in his clever, ancient mind. He would obey the letter of Zeus's command, but he would bind his queen to his kingdom with a different kind of chain, a chain forged not of iron, but of the sacred, unbreakable laws of the underworld itself. He turned to Persephone, his voice, for the first time, soft and filled with a gentle, persuasive warmth. "My queen," he said, the great king of the gods has commanded your return to the world of light. And I must obey. You are free to go to your mother. But before you depart, I ask only one small thing of you. You have not eaten since you arrived in my kingdom. You must be weak. I beg you, take just a small taste of the fruit of my realm, to give you strength for the long journey ahead." His words were filled with a seeming kindness, a gentle concern for her well-being. And Persephone, her heart now soaring with the sudden, unexpected joy of her impending freedom, her mind clouded by her long fast and her deep sorrow, did not sense the subtle trap that lay hidden within his offer. The king of the underworld summoned one of his silent attendants, who brought forward a single, perfect pomegranate. Its skin was a deep, dark, blood red, and when Hades broke it open, its seeds glistened in the dim light like a cluster of dark, crimson jewels. The ancient, unbreakable law of the underworld was absolute: anyone who tasted the food of the dead could never fully leave the kingdom of the dead. They would be forever bound to its shadows, their destiny inextricably linked to the dark realm below. Persephone, in her joyful innocence, did not know this law. And so, she took a few of the sweet, dark seeds from her husband's hand, some say 3, some say 6, and she ate them. In that moment, a great, invisible contract was sealed. A faint, triumphant smile touched the lips of the Dark King. And Hermes, the messenger god, who understood the ancient laws, knew that the situation had now been irrevocably changed. And so, Persephone began her journey back to the world of light, her heart filled with a joyful anticipation. But as she traveled, a new and strange feeling began to stir within her. The taste of the dark, sweet pomegranate seed still lingered on her tongue, a taste that seemed to bind her, in some deep and fundamental way, to the silent, shadowy kingdom she was leaving behind. When she finally emerged from the darkness and into the sunlit world, her mother, Demeter, was there to greet her. A great cry of joy broke from the harvest goddess's lips, a cry so powerful that it sent a wave of life surging back into the barren earth. The withered trees began to sprout new leaves. The brown fields began to turn a vibrant, living green. The spring had returned. But as the two goddesses embraced, Demeter, in her divine wisdom, sensed the subtle change in her daughter. She saw the faint, lingering shadow of the underworld in her eyes. "My child," she asked, her voice now laced with a new and sudden fear, "did you eat anything while you were in the land of the dead?" And Persephone, in her innocence, told her mother of the pomegranate seeds. Demeter's heart grew cold once more. She knew the ancient law. She knew that her daughter could now never be fully hers again. A great and terrible argument erupted between the gods, but the contract was unbreakable. Finally, a new and eternal compromise was reached, a pact that would forever govern the turning of the seasons. Because she had eaten the food of the dead, Persephone would have to spend a portion of each year, 1/3 for the 3 seeds she had eaten, in the underworld, as its rightful queen, ruling by her husband's side. And for the remaining 2/3 of the year, she would be free to return to the world of light, to be with her mother, and to bring the life-giving warmth of the spring and the summer to the world of mortals. And so it was. Each year, when Persephone descends into the darkness to take her place on the throne of the underworld, her mother, Demeter, mourns her absence. And in her sorrow, she withdraws her favor from the earth, and the world enters the cold, barren sleep of autumn and winter. And each year, when Persephone returns from the land of the dead, her mother's joy brings the world back to life, and the great, vibrant, and beautiful explosion of spring and summer returns to the land. The great cosmic crisis was over. The balance had been restored. And the rhythm of the seasons, a rhythm born of a mother's sorrow and a stolen daughter's return, was now set for all of eternity. The rhythm of the seasons had been established, a great, cosmic sigh of grief and joy that now breathed life and death into the world above. The kingdom of the dead had settled into its solemn, eternal order. But the boundaries between the living and the dead, though guarded by terrible sentinels and defined by immutable law, were not merely observed by mortals. They were, on rare and legendary occasions, challenged. Throughout the heroic age, certain extraordinary figures, demigods and heroes driven by love, by duty, or by a courage so profound it bordered on madness, would dare to breach the great divide. Their journeys, their catabasis, or descents, into the underworld would create legends that echoed through both realms, revealing that the paths to death's domain, though perilous, were not entirely closed to the living, though the price of such a passage always remained impossibly steep. Among all the mortal champions of that age, none possessed a strength to match the mighty son of Zeus, the great Heracles. His life had been a series of immense and seemingly impossible labors, 12 great trials imposed upon him by the whim of a jealous goddess and the command of a lesser king. And now, he faced his 12th and final labor, a task so audacious, so beyond the realm of mortal possibility, that it was designed to be his certain doom. The king Eurystheus commanded him to descend into the very heart of Hades, and to bring back from the kingdom of the dead its most terrible guardian, the three-headed hound, Cerberus himself. When the command was given, it is said that even the hardened heroes gathered at the royal court gasped in disbelief. None had ever returned from attempting to even approach death's guardian, let alone to triumph over him in a contest of strength. But Heracles, his life a testament to overcoming the impossible, did not refuse. His preparation for this final, ultimate descent differed markedly from his previous quests. This was not a monster to be slain with a club or an arrow. This was a fundamental force of the cosmos, a sacred guardian of a divine kingdom. He knew that strength alone would not suffice. And so, rather than arming himself with bronze and iron, he prepared himself spiritually. He journeyed to the sacred site of Eleusis, where the great mysteries of Demeter and Persephone were celebrated. There, he sought initiation into the secrets of the afterlife, hoping to gain the knowledge and the divine favor necessary for his perilous journey. The priests of Eleusis, recognizing the divine will at work, purified him of his past sins and taught him the sacred rites, the words and the gestures that would allow him to approach the underworld not as a mere intruder, but as one who understood and respected its profound mysteries. His divine heritage also came to his aid. His half-sister, the wise goddess Athena, and his half-brother, the messenger god Hermes, agreed to accompany him on the initial stages of his descent, their divine presence as a powerful passport, allowing him to pass the first guardians of the underworld without conflict. They were not there to fight his battles for him, but to guide him, to teach him how to navigate this strange and terrible realm, to help him recognize the difference between the lost and wandering souls, the justly punished, and the honored dead. The great hero, a man known for his often blinding rage, was learning that in this kingdom, knowledge, reverence, and a quiet diplomacy would serve him better than all the force in his mighty arms. Their descent began at a place in Laconia, a deep, dark cavern that was believed to be one of the few mortal entrances to the underworld. As he passed through the great, dark gateway, leaving the warm, sunlit world of the living behind him, he entered a realm of profound silence and cold, still air. The path led him downward, always downward, through vast, echoing caverns and along the banks of the great, dark rivers of the dead. He saw the grim ferryman, Charon, and his boat filled with whispering, insubstantial shades. But as a living man, Heracles did not require passage in the ferryman's skiff. His own great strength could carry him across the sorrowful waters of the Acheron. When at last he stood before the obsidian throne of the Dark King and his beautiful, sorrowful queen, Heracles did not make a demand. He did not issue a challenge. He bowed his head with a warrior's respect. He explained the nature of his final, impossible labor, a task imposed upon him by the will of the gods. And he asked for permission to attempt the trial, to face Cerberus, not through violence, but as a contest of strength and will. Hades, the lord of the dead, looked upon this mighty, living hero who had come to his court with such uncharacteristic humility. Perhaps he was impressed by the hero's courage. Perhaps he was swayed by the quiet, persuasive words of his queen, Persephone, who saw in this hero's quest a different kind of justice. He agreed to the hero's request, but with one, single, absolute condition. Heracles must subdue the great hound using neither his club, nor his arrows, nor any other weapon. He must face the guardian of the underworld with only his own bare hands, his own strength, and his own indomitable will. Heracles accepted the terms. He was led to the great, dark gates where the monstrous hound stood its eternal vigil. The wrestling match that followed shook the very foundations of the underworld's darkest caves. Imagine the scene. 3 great, snarling heads, their eyes burning with the cold fire of the underworld, their jaws lined with teeth as sharp as obsidian shards, all snapping and lunging at the hero's throat. From the great beast's back, a mane of writhing serpents hissed and struck, their fangs dripping with a black, deadly venom. And its great, coiling serpent's tail lashed through the air like a whip of living hatred. But Heracles was the son of Zeus. He was protected by the skin of the Nemean lion, which no weapon, and no fang, could pierce. He met the great beast's fury not with his own rage, but with a calm, focused, and immense strength. He sidestepped the snapping jaws, he ignored the striking serpents, and he gripped the 3 thick necks of the great hound, locking his mighty arms around them in an unbreakable hold. The grappling continued for what seemed like eternities. The great beast thrashed and roared, its struggles shaking the very caverns, but it could not break the hero's grip. And Heracles, his own immense strength tested to its absolute limit, held firm. Slowly, gradually, the mighty hound, for the first time in its eternal existence, began to recognize a strength greater than its own. Its struggles grew weaker, its terrible growls softened to a low whimper of submission. Victory belonged to the mortal son of the gods. But with his victory came a profound wisdom. As he led the now subdued Cerberus on a chain of adamantine up through the dark passages and back into the world of light, Heracles understood that this triumph could not, and should not, be permanent. The great hound, whimpering and blinking in the unfamiliar light of the sun, was a creature of darkness and shadow. It did not belong in the world of the living. Its place, its sacred duty, was at the gates of the underworld, maintaining the cosmic order that separated the living from the dead. And so, after presenting the great beast to the terrified King Eurystheus, thus completing his final labor, Heracles, in an act of profound respect for the divine order, honored his commitment. He personally led the great hound back down into the darkness, back to its rightful post at the gates of the kingdom of the dead. His great journey had proven that the boundaries of death could be breached by a hero of sufficient strength and courage. But it had also taught him a deeper lesson, that true strength lies not in defying the cosmic order, but in understanding and respecting it. The hero had completed his trial. He had faced death itself and returned, his final labor not just a feat of strength, but an act of profound and quiet wisdom. If the journey of the mighty Heracles into the underworld was a testament to the power of strength and divine will, the descent of Orpheus was a quiet, heartbreaking testament to the power of love and of art. He was not a king, nor was he a warrior. He was a poet and a musician, a son of the Thracian king and the muse of epic poetry, Calliope. From his divine mother, he had inherited a gift so profound, so sublime, that it seemed to be a living fragment of the cosmos's first creative song. When Orpheus played his lyre and sang, the world itself would fall silent to listen. The wind would cease its sighing through the trees, the rivers would still their currents, and the wild beasts of the forest, the wolf, the bear, the lion, would emerge from their lairs and lie down peacefully at his feet, their savage hearts soothed by the pure, celestial beauty of his melodies. Even the ancient, unfeeling stones and the great, silent trees were said to weep when he sang of sorrow, and to dance when he sang of joy. His life, for a time, was a reflection of his art, a perfect and harmonious composition. He found his soul's counterpart in the beautiful wood nymph, Eurydice. Their love was a quiet, gentle, and all-consuming thing, a melody played in perfect time. They spent their days wandering through the sun-dappled forests and the green, peaceful meadows of Thrace, his music the constant, beautiful soundtrack to their shared existence. Their wedding day was a celebration of this perfect union, a joyous occasion where the very air seemed to hum with the promise of a long and happy life. But the great, silent spinners of fate, who weave the threads of sorrow into even the most beautiful of tapestries, had other plans. Shortly after their wedding, as Eurydice was wandering through a meadow with her nymph companions, a lesser god, a rustic beekeeper named Aristeus, was struck by her beauty and, in his clumsy desire, began to pursue her. Fleeing from his unwanted advances, Eurydice did not see the viper nesting in the tall grass. The serpent struck her heel, a single, sharp, and fatal bite. A quiet, almost imperceptible wound that would silence the world's greatest music. She collapsed into the soft grass, her name a final, fading whisper on her lips, and her soul, like a gentle, startled sigh, departed from her body, beginning its long, silent journey downward. When Orpheus found her, the world itself seemed to fall silent. The sun grew dim, the flowers in the meadow drooped their heads, and a great, terrible, and profound quiet descended upon the land, for the source of its most beautiful music was now choked with a grief so absolute it could not be sung. For days, he wandered the earth in a state of silent, inconsolable sorrow, his lyre, which had once filled the world with such joy, now hanging silent and heavy in his hands. He could not eat. He could not sleep. The world of the living, without his beloved Eurydice, had become a gray and tuneless echo, a pale imitation of the vibrant, colorful world they had once shared. And in the depths of this terrible, silent grief, a new and audacious idea, a plan born of a love that refused to accept the finality of death, took root in his heart. He would do what no mortal had ever dared to do for love. He would not challenge the underworld with strength, like Heracles. He would charm it. He would descend into the kingdom of the dead, and with his music, with the pure, undeniable power of his art and his love, he would persuade its dark, silent king to release his bride. His journey began, as all such journeys do, with a descent into darkness. He found a hidden entrance to the underworld, a dark cave shrouded in mist, and with his lyre in his hand, he stepped across the threshold, leaving the world of light and memory behind him. The path downward was cold and silent, but Orpheus was not afraid. He began to play his lyre, and to sing. And the song he sang was one of profound and heartbreaking sorrow, a melody that told the story of his lost love, of the sun on her hair, of the sound of her laughter, of the terrible, silent emptiness she had left behind. As he reached the banks of the river Charon, the grim ferryman, Charon, emerged from the mists to demand his fee. But as the first notes of Orpheus's song reached his ancient, weary ears, the ferryman paused. The sorrow in the music was a sorrow deeper than any he had ever ferried across his dark, silent river. The gnarled hand that held his pole grew still. And for the first time in his eternal, monotonous existence, the grim ferryman was moved. He silently gestured for the living poet to board his skiff, and he ferried him across the river of woe, the price of passage paid not with a coin, but with a tear that the ancient ferryman did not even know he was capable of shedding. On the far shore, the great, three-headed hound, Cerberus, rose to meet him, its three throats issuing a terrible, echoing growl that shook the very caverns of the underworld. But as Orpheus continued to play, the great beast's growls softened to a low whimper. The writhing serpents on its back grew still. And the three great heads, one by one, laid themselves down upon the cold, stone floor, its terrible, vigilant eyes closing in a deep and peaceful slumber, lulled to sleep by a melody of such gentle, heartbreaking beauty. He walked on, his music preceding him like a gentle, sorrowful light. He passed through the asphodel meadows, and the countless, drifting shades of the dead, who had long ago forgotten all mortal passion, paused in their aimless wandering. They gathered around the living poet, their ethereal forms drawn to the strange, beautiful, and painful memory of what it was to love, to lose, and to feel. His music was a brief, warm rain on the dry, barren soil of their forgotten hearts. His song even reached into the deepest, darkest pits of Tartarus. And there, for a single, blessed moment, the eternal punishments were stayed. The great, burning wheel of Ixion ceased its turning. The vultures that tore at the liver of Tityus paused in their grim work. Tantalus, for a single, fleeting moment, forgot his eternal thirst. And even Sisyphus, the man of endless, futile labor, sat down upon his great, heavy boulder and wept, his tears not for his own eternal struggle, but for the beautiful, tragic love that was being sung into the very fabric of the underworld. Finally, he arrived at the great, dark throne room of Hades and Persephone. He stood before the silent king and his sorrowful queen, and he sang his final, most powerful plea. He sang not of his own grief, but of their love. He sang of the brief, beautiful time they had shared in the sunlit world. He sang of the vibrant, living world that Eurydice had been stolen from too soon, a world that was now incomplete without her. And he sang of the nature of love itself, a force as powerful and as fundamental as any of the great cosmic powers. And as he sang, the entire court of the dead fell silent. The very air seemed to hold its breath. The music moved the unmovable. Persephone, the queen of the dead, who knew all too well the pain of being stolen from the world of light, wept openly, her tears like falling stars in the gloom of the great hall. And even the heart of the Dark King himself, a heart that had been hardened by an eternity of silence and finality, was touched. He had never before allowed a soul to return from his kingdom. The laws were absolute. But the beauty of this mortal's love, the sheer, undeniable power of his art, had introduced a new and unforeseen variable into the eternal, unchanging mathematics of his realm. He agreed. He would allow Eurydice to return to the world of the living. But he imposed one, single, simple, and terrible condition. Orpheus must lead her out of the underworld. She would follow behind him, a silent shade. And he must not, under any circumstances, look back at her until they had both fully passed through the final gate and were standing once more in the full light of the sun. If he were to turn back, even for a moment, she would be lost to him forever. Orpheus agreed, his heart soaring with a joy so immense it almost overwhelmed his sorrow. And so, the long, silent journey back began. He led the way, his lyre now silent, his every sense focused on the path ahead. Behind him, he could feel her presence, a faint, weightless, and utterly silent shadow. He could not hear her footsteps. He could not feel her breath. He could only trust. He walked through the great, silent meadows, past the sleeping form of Cerberus, and to the banks of the Charon. Charon ferried them both across, his gaze fixed on the far shore, his silence now a heavy, knowing presence. As they began the final ascent, as the path grew steeper and the first, faint, gray light of the mortal world began to appear ahead, a terrible, gnawing doubt began to creep into Orpheus's heart. Was she still there? Had the Dark King tricked him? Was he walking alone, a fool deluded by his own desperate hope? The silence behind him was absolute, a perfect and terrifying void. The urge to turn, to catch just a single, reassuring glimpse of her beloved face, became an all-consuming, physical ache. He reached the final gate. The warm, bright, beautiful light of the sun washed over his face. He was back in the world of the living. And in that single, fatal moment of relief and overwhelming, desperate love, he forgot the king's command. He turned. She was there. Just a single step behind him, her form still shrouded in the shadows of the underworld's gate. He saw her face, her beautiful, sorrowful eyes filled not with anger, but with a deep and heartbreaking understanding. He saw her lips form his name, a silent, soundless farewell. And then, like a wisp of smoke caught in a sudden breeze, she was pulled back, her form dissolving into the darkness, lost to him forever. He had reached for her, but his arms closed on empty air. He had won her back from death itself, only to lose her again to a single, simple, and tragically human moment of doubt. The poet's lament was now complete. And it would echo, unanswered, for all of eternity. As the great heroic age of Greece began to fade, as the demigods and monsters retreated from the world of men and into the realm of legend, a new kind of hero began to emerge. These were not warriors who wielded swords of bronze, but thinkers who wielded the power of reason. In the quiet groves of the academy and in the bustling marketplaces of Athens, the philosophers began to ask new and profound questions. They looked at the ancient, time-honored stories of the underworld, at the tales of Charon and Cerberus, of the asphodel meadows and the pits of Tartarus, and they began to reinterpret them. They dared to ask, what if the afterlife is not merely a destination, but a reflection of a deeper, cosmic justice? What if its geography is not just a place, but a map of the human soul? What if the journey of the dead is governed not by the whims of the gods, but by eternal and rational principles? The first great philosopher to systematically reimagine the underworld was Plato. In his magnificent work, The Republic, he presents a story, the myth of air, which transformed the traditional mythological framework into a sophisticated philosophical vision of cosmic justice and reincarnation. In this telling, the afterlife is no longer a simple, final destination, but a great and intricate system of purification and education for the soul. Souls do not simply arrive in a shadowy realm, they embark on a 1,000-year journey between lifetimes, a journey designed to allow them to experience the full consequences of the choices they made in their earthly existence. Imagine the soul after death, arriving not just at a river, but at a great and luminous meadow, a place where the judges of the underworld sit upon their thrones. Here, souls are judged not just for their deeds, but for the state of their character. The just and virtuous souls are sent on a journey upward, into the heavens, where they experience 1,000 years of unimaginable bliss and divine contemplation. And the unjust souls, those whose lives were marked by tyranny, by cruelty, by a disregard for the principles of Ma'at, are sent on a journey downward, into the earth, where they endure 1,000 years of purification and suffering, their torments perfectly and mathematically proportional to the harm they had caused in life. This was not the eternal, hopeless punishment of Tartarus, it was a form of divine pedagogy, a cosmic education designed to cleanse the soul and to teach it the true nature of justice. In this Platonic vision, the underworld becomes a great, alchemical laboratory for the soul. And after their 1,000-year journey, of either reward or purification, all the souls gather once more in the great meadow. Here, they are presented with their next great choice. They are shown the patterns of all the possible future lives they might lead, the life of a king, of a poet, of a simple craftsman, even the life of an animal. And each soul, now armed with the wisdom they have gained from their previous existence and their long journey through the afterlife, must choose their next incarnation. The choice is entirely free, and it is in this moment of absolute freedom that the soul's true character is revealed. A soul that has learned the lessons of justice will choose a virtuous life, while a soul that is still attached to the illusions of power and wealth might choose the life of a tyrant, thus condemning itself to another cycle of suffering. After making their choice, the souls are led to the river of forgetfulness, the Lethe. They drink its waters, forgetting the details of their past lives and their time in the afterlife, so that they can be reborn into the world fresh, innocent, and ready to learn anew. Plato's great myth transformed the underworld from a place of finality into a dynamic, cyclical system, a great and beautiful cosmic machine designed for the education and the ultimate perfection of the human soul. Following Plato, the Stoic philosophers approached the idea of death through the lens of natural philosophy. They viewed the soul's fate not as a mythological journey, but as a simple and rational expression of the logos, the divine reason that permeates all of existence. For the Stoics, the underworld, with its rivers and its judges, was largely a metaphor. Death itself was not a transition to another realm, but a simple return to the source, a dissolution of the individual identity back into the great, cosmic consciousness from which it had temporarily emerged. The great Roman Stoic, the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, characterized death as a simple and natural change of elements. "You came into this world as a part," he wrote in his Meditations, "and you will depart as a part. Accept this change as you would accept the seasonal alteration of nature." This perspective dissolved the traditional fears about the underworld journey and its post-mortem judgments. The realm of death, if it existed at all, operated according to the same logical and natural principles that governed all of existence. The soul, which was a spark of the divine fire, simply returned to the great fire. This process carried neither reward nor punishment, it was merely the completion of a natural cycle. The Stoic ethical framework, therefore, derived its motivation not from a hope for reward or a fear of punishment in the afterlife, but from the desire to live a virtuous life in accordance with reason in the present moment. A wise sage prepared for death not through ritual or belief, but through a lifetime of philosophical contemplation that revealed mortality's proper and necessary place within the grand, eternal reason of the cosmos. And in contrast to this cool, philosophical abstraction, the various mystery religions of the Greco-Roman world maintain that the deepest truths of the afterlife could not be understood through reason alone, but must be directly experienced. Through secret and powerful initiation rituals, these traditions offered their followers a chance to symbolically journey through the underworld while still living. In the ecstatic rites of the Dionysian mysteries, participants would experience a kind of ego death, a temporary dissolution of their individual identity that was seen as a preparation for their actual mortality. And in the great Eleusinian mysteries, which reenacted the story of Demeter and Persephone, initiates would witness the sacred drama of the descent and return, an experience that was said to have removed the fear of death entirely, transforming their understanding of it from a final ending into a beautiful and natural part of the great cycle of life and renewal. This rich and complex interplay between traditional mythology, philosophical reinterpretation, and direct, mystical experience created a dynamic and evolving understanding of death and the afterlife in the ancient world. The underworld was not a single, static concept. It was a great, dark, and fertile field of the imagination, a place where humanity wrestled with its most profound and most persistent questions. It was a mythological setting that was constantly being transformed into a philosophical framework, a place that began as a home for the dead, and which evolved into a great, complex, and beautiful mirror, reflecting every culture's highest hopes and deepest fears about the nature of existence itself. As the great civilization of Greece began to fade, its power waning under the shadow of a new and rising force from the west, its mythology did not die. Instead, it embarked on a new kind of journey. When the pragmatic, powerful, and ever-expanding Roman civilization absorbed the Greek world, it did not seek to erase its rich cultural heritage. Rather, it absorbed it, adapted it, and reinterpreted it through the lens of its own distinct values and sensibilities. The Greek underworld, with its complex geography and its profound psychological depth, was now given Roman names and Roman purposes, beginning a long and fascinating transformation that would carry it through the centuries and into the very heart of the Western imagination. The Romans, a people of immense practicality and organizational genius, approached the Greek pantheon with a characteristic pragmatism. They did not simply adopt the Greek gods wholesale, but sought out their functional equivalents within their own ancient religious traditions before allowing the fuller, more complex Greek mythological framework to be integrated. And so, the dark and solemn Greek king of the underworld, Hades, was identified with the Roman god, Pluto. This was more than just a change of name, it was a subtle but profound shift in emphasis. The name Pluto derives from the Greek word for wealth, and this new title emphasized the god's dominion not just over the dead, but over the riches that lay hidden within the earth, the precious metals, the fertile soil, the seeds that would one day sprout into a bountiful harvest. For the Romans, a civilization that connected divine favor so closely with material prosperity, this transformation was a natural one. The king of the dead became not just a lord of shadows, but a god of subterranean wealth, his kingdom a source of both finality and fortune. The other denizens of the underworld underwent a similar romanization. The three-headed hound Cerberus retained his form and his function, but the Romans, with their love of order and precise description, often referred to him with the Latin epithet triceps, the three-headed one. They developed specific, standardized protocols for appeasing him, including the baking of special honey cakes, known as sops, which became a formal part of Roman funeral rites in a way that Greek traditions had never fully codified. The grim ferryman, Charon, continued his eternal duty under the same name, but in Roman art, his features often became more ghoulish, more explicitly terrifying, a reflection perhaps of a Roman sensibility that saw death as a more alien and less familiar transition than their Greek predecessors had. The great Latin poet, Virgil, in his masterpiece, the Aeneid, took all of these transformed elements and wove them together, creating the most detailed, systematic, and influential map of the afterlife in all of classical literature. His description of the underworld combined the geographical features of the Greek myths with a distinctly Roman sense of order and purpose. In Virgil's vision, the underworld became a great and complex bureaucracy. The judgment process, presided over by Minos, now operated with a Roman legal precision. Evidence was presented, testimony was heard, and circumstances were considered, all reflecting the sophisticated judicial processes that the Romans so valued in their own earthly courts. But Virgil's greatest innovation was to transform the underworld from a mere destination for the dead into a grand stage for the unfolding of national destiny. His hero, Aeneas, a Trojan refugee destined to become the founder of the Roman people, descends into the underworld not just for personal knowledge, but to receive a prophetic vision of the future glory of Rome. In the blessed fields of Elysium, he meets the shade of his father, Anchises. And his father shows him not just the past, but the future. He points out the great souls who are waiting to be reborn, the future heroes of Rome, Romulus, Caesar, the great Augustus. This journey transformed the underworld from a place of memory into a place of prophecy, a realm where a nation's destiny was made manifest. As the Roman Empire itself began to decline, and a new faith, Christianity, began to spread throughout the Mediterranean world, the classical underworld underwent its next great transformation. The early Church Fathers, the great Christian thinkers, did not simply ignore or condemn the pagan traditions, they engaged with them, selectively incorporating elements that aligned with their new theology, while reinterpreting others within a new, Christian framework. The geography of the Greek Tartarus, with its eternal torments so precisely matched to specific sins, provided a powerful and ready-made template for the Christian imagination of hell. The image of Tantalus, forever reaching for fruit that he could never grasp, became a potent metaphor for the soul that grasps at salvation without true repentance. And the endless, futile labor of Sisyphus became a symbol of the emptiness of a life lived without faith. And the concept of purgatory, which would become so central to medieval Catholic theology, borrowed heavily from the Platonic idea of a period of purification between lifetimes. The notion that a soul could be cleansed through a period of graduated suffering, rather than being immediately assigned to an eternal, final destination, found a new and powerful home within Christian thought. This great work of synthesis and transformation reached its absolute zenith in the Middle Ages, in the mind of the great Florentine poet, Dante Alighieri. His masterpiece, The Divine Comedy, is the culmination of this long, 2,000-year process. In his epic poem, Dante embarks on his own journey through the afterlife, and his guide through hell and purgatory is none other than the Roman poet, Virgil, himself. Dante's Underworld is a magnificent and terrifying creation, a place that combines the geographical features of the classical world with the moral theology of Christianity. He encounters Charon and Cerberus, he sees the great rivers of the dead, but his journey is a uniquely Christian one, a pilgrimage from sin and despair, through repentance and purification, and towards the ultimate, divine light of paradise. In the centuries that followed, as the Renaissance brought a renewed interest in the classical world, the images and stories of the Greek underworld continued to inspire and to fascinate. The great artists, like Michelangelo, would incorporate classical figures like Charon into their depictions of the Christian Last Judgment. The great writers, like Shakespeare, would create ghosts who were haunted by both classical and Christian notions of an unquiet death. The underworld had become a part of the very fabric of the Western imagination. And so, our long and deep journey into the kingdom of the dead comes to its gentle close. The story of the underworld, which began in the primordial darkness of chaos, and which was given its form by the silent, solemn will of a dark king, has proven to be a story not just of endings, but of endless, new beginnings. It is a testament to the power of myth to adapt, to transform, and to find new meaning in new ages. It is a story that reminds us that our deepest questions about life, about death, and about what lies beyond, are as old as humanity itself. And that in seeking to understand the darkness, we often find our most persistent and most beautiful light. As you drift now into the deepest and most peaceful realms of your own sleep, let the great, silent river of this story carry you gently onward. The ferryman is waiting, but his boat is a soft and comfortable bed. The final judgment has been passed, and the verdict is one of peace. There is nothing left to do now, but to rest.